Well, the X-ray, Michael. X-ray of Shearing the Rams is obviously a pretty important document. What should tell us about this picture here?
Yeah, well, this is a life-size
Wow.
print of the digital version of the X-ray. So it's not the original X-ray, it's an assemblage of about 40 plates, approximately.
About 40 pieces of film, about this big.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, so originally the painting was put on top of an X-ray machine and the radiation was put up through, and depending on the thickness and the elemental weight of materials there, we see or don't see certain parts.
That's what gives us the image.
That's right, yeah.
It's a kind of transmission image to the whole structure of the painting. Yep.
Yep. And sometimes it's not seeing it's not seeing form, sometimes it's just seeing the absence of form. So they are very difficult things to interpret, and this is by no means an easy X-ray to interpret.
So what's significant about this one, though?
Okay, the most obvious thing is this dramatic change to the figure.
That's to this figure here?
That's right. It is hard
to... Central shearer?
Yep.
Yep.
So originally, this figure we see here, this face and this back, is not the figure we see in the final painting. Okay. That's right.
You can just see it actually in the texture through here.
Yeah, you actually can just see a sense of the final face. So originally Roberts decided, probably in the space, probably actually painting someone actually probably posed for him within the shed, and he painted this figure a much sort of higher back, leaning around a sheep.
It's a much more static pose, yeah?
It is, yeah.
Much more of a solid right angle?
That's right, yeah. And he's looked at it and made adjustments and decided to revise the composition slightly.
Can we say that he didn't have a beard?
Yeah, I think we can definitely say at one point he didn't have a beard. I guess we don't know whether he later painted the beard on, but there's definitely a sense of a clean-shaven face as opposed to the final image has the beard all the way through.
So that's a full flesh tone, like that's just the flesh tones of the face.
Yeah.
But here you can see that there is a beard because it doesn't have lead white or a flesh tone in it.
That's right. Yeah. It's probably most likely a combination of lead white and vermilion, which is responding to the X-rays, which is basically semi-opaque to the X-ray, so we get to image it there.
So he's not just changed his posture; he's probably also changed him as a type.
That's right.
As a figure type.
Yeah, I think he would have gone from an actual person to much more of a more generalised sense, a more generalised depiction of the bushman, of the Australian, the hard-working Australian in the at the labour at work. We also see quite well actually. You actually see the original hand.
Oh, okay, and that's about shears. Here in the painting.
That's right. You can actually still see a glimpse of the original shears.
That's here.
Yep, and that's just there. So although he painted it out, he wasn't too particular about it. He was happy to leave some areas. Also, because of the change back through here, this the back leg of the shear, he had to readjust some of these areas up here, particularly
around these passages in the painting itself. Yeah,
it's sort of quite a critical part. This is an old repair. A lead white repair, most likely.
What's that? That's on the back of the canvas, in fact, not on the front. Yeah, because we don't see that, do we?
It's hidden
in the painting. Yeah. It's actually on the back. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just sort of an artifact that's sort of left. Of course, we also see the tacks that are holding the canvas onto its support.
So they're the white, and they show up because they're steel.
Steel, that's right.
Yeah, solid metal.
Solid metal. Yeah, and then there's other things. We get to see which comes first and what's painted later.
You talked about these poles as well, and there's a significance about that.
That's right. You can really see quite clearly here that there's a strong response in the X-ray. Whereas, given the poles are painted quite dark, you can find similar areas, perhaps like through here, which that's the sort of response you perhaps expect. But realistically, the response is much more close to the paleness.
So what you're saying is that the colour we see here is in fact very like this in the painting that we see, but in the X-ray, obviously the X-ray doesn't give us the same image for here as it does for here. Yeah. So the poles in fact start out as a different colour, much paler pole.
That was like the point of interest to me. So we pursued it further, but we had to use various methods of technical examination to find that originally these poles were actually painted a slightly warm grey colour. So that's quite a major change in the composition.
Sure.
So you would have painted them into completion because the poles actually come down through. They start to come down through the figures. We know that the architecture went in first.
Okay, that's interesting. So he's actually put the poles in place before this shearer even goes in place.
That's right. Yeah, even the first version. So he's blocking it in. That said, we can tell also that he's painted around the sheep, so this form was sort of put in first, or at least spaced out. He must have sort of mapped it out.
So he leaves a kind of reserve. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. We have no sense that he drew the composition with charcoal or anything like that. We can't actually confirm or we just can't confirm that. But I do see under various forms of examination him drawing in, Robert's drawing in with paint, so with a brush. Yeah. And quite a quick and fast response to what he was seeing in front of him.
It's an interesting idea, though, that you could paint something perhaps as planned as this directly on the surface.
Yeah, well, it's important for him. And this is sort of it's almost a political statement at the time. There's no reason why he had to construct this or paint this within the shed, but he's so interested, as all the young painters of the time, at the turn of the 1880s and 1890s, with the effect of light, and particularly the effect of Australian light on colour. And so that's what he's trying to capture. You can't do that in the studio in an enclosed artificial light. And so he's actually doing it in front of the figures.
But I'm nevertheless interested in the idea about how you actually build the picture on the canvas. Yeah. And if we can't see underdrawing, I mean, obviously there may be underdrawing there, we just can't reveal it.
That's a possibility.
But it's also possible that he sort of paints or draws the picture into place with a with the brush rather than with something else.
Up to 80 or 90 sketches in the shed first before he even begun the canvas. So did a lot of thinking, a lot of laying down on paper, ideas and concepts. So small portraits.
So it's probably fairly well fixed in his head, in fact, what he wants to do, which would allow you to come to the canvas fairly directly then. Yeah.
But nevertheless, he goes back and makes adjustments and makes changes, and dramatic changes too.
Yeah, because this is serious. I mean, this is finished, isn't it?
That's right.
And then it's changed. So
and same with this. And so what he's doing is what the viewer does. He's responding to the picture himself as an artist and making the same sorts of adjustments that probably other art historians would make themselves. So it's a dual process there. He's the maker, but he's also the viewer for a period of time. So it's sort of a nice thing. It's hard to see, but in actual fact, there's a few other figures that have changed as well. This figure back here.
That you only see in the X-ray as a change?
Yeah,
so there's a shift in the head here?
Yeah. And there's one surviving sketch is in a drawing, which a work on paper with gouache and charcoal, which Roberts did, and he actually depicts this figure in a slightly different pose, and we now know that's the same pose that originally he painted it in before he made the adjustment. So the pose was originally with the head back further, pulling on his braces, probably in a stretching sort of pose, the strain of hard work and hard labour. But quite possibly though, that figure, along with the figure who's drinking out of the billy.
That's this one here?
Yeah, I think the form would have been replicated too much, and so he had to sort of create a difference. And they sort of form a V. They sort of come down through here, which of course is an area of interest for Roberts formerly, because this is the intersection here.
Of all the orthogonals, it's the focal point
of perspective. And a lot of people have talked about this composition being constructed around triangles as well. These sort of pyramid forms that sort of come up in various ways and are replicated through, come down. You can see them in various parts of the picture. And he's just relying on a methodology he would have learnt as part of the formal training he had, both in Australia and briefly overseas. So it's sort of an academic construction.
Because they're fairly old ideas, or fairly well-established ideas. Yeah. That idea of building either blocks of colour like the blues, or kind of triangle and.
Yeah. Well, even when Roberts was before he went to National Gallery School, he was part of the schools of design, and the classes that he would have done there would have been geometric drawing and construction and things like that. So
he'd be quite formally aware of formal construction of pictures.
Yeah. Definitely, as well as referencing other artists who'd been before him, and thinking about successful compositions that are established through time, all the way back to the 15th century and before. Although they were sort of isolated in Australia, from a point of view of geography, they weren't isolated in terms of intellectual ideas, and they pursued it, and perhaps in some ways they were even more keen to pursue those ideas.
And of course, he travels to and fro from Europe to Australia as well, doesn't he, Robert?
That's right. Yeah. By the time he paints this picture, he's already spent time overseas. He's trained in some important academies overseas. And he's travelled around. he's almost accidentally run into some people in Spain who were studying in Paris who were directly interested in Impressionism, and he brought those ideas back to Australia. So.